Welcome to the Catbird Quilts. I'm Kathy Martin. Today's video, at long last, the graduation quilt for my younger daughter, which is a checkerboard quilt. And you know, I have a lot to say about it. So stay with me. So I've been working on this quilt for a while. The graduation has come and gone. The first year of college has come and gone. We're into the second year of college for my younger daughter, and it is just now getting finished. And I would feel apologetic about that, except it was by design. As soon as the older daughter got her graduation quilt, she started jonesing for / plotting and scheming for her graduation quilt. And since she's the one that goes with me to the fabric store, she got to have a little more of a hand in her own quilt than Big Sister did. And so at one point, well, let me back up and tell you. My two daughters are 17 months apart, which puts them one school grade apart. And when I made my older daughter's quilt, I had not quite been quilting a year. In fact, her quilt was made up of half square triangles, and I had never made them before. So in classic Kathy Martin fashion, had never made half square triangles. So what do? Make an entire quilt of half square triangles. So I was learning and figuring out fabric and using shirts and all of that. And my younger daughter started going with me to the local fabric store just for all of the various projects that I had. And it became just our thing. We love it. Any fabric store can be the crappiest, big box, not really great quality quilting cottons. It could be a little hole in the wall place. It could be a thrift store, but we really enjoy going and looking at fabric and talking about projects. And she's the one that I call the colorist. So she has a really exceptionally good eye for color. In fact, very often we'll look at a fabric pull that I've done that I feel like nailed it. And she'll go, there's too big of a jump between this color and this color. And she's almost always right. And so maybe she's always right. Don't tell her I said that. But we'll go to the local quilt store and, they have the fat quarters at the register because fabric salespeople are very smart. It's the impulse buy, the candy counter at the fabric store. So as we were, buying for other projects, she would thumb through and I would thumb through the fat quarters. And I noticed that she was very interested in dark navies that had constellations on them. And they're black fabrics with like Halloween fabrics, so skulls and bats and whatever. And I would get one or two or more for her. And as we started talking about what she wanted for her quilt, she told me that she wanted a checkerboard quilt, black and white checkerboard quilt. And I was like, okay, are you sure it might not have enough variation? She's like, no, that's what I want. Okay, so let me spread it out and show you, and then we can talk about some of those great fabrics that she picked. So I'll stretch it out in just a minute, but before I do that, I have to show you the fabric that started it all. It is this black background with floral. It is a Rifle Paper Company fabric, and it came in a fabric bundle from Crimson Tate, I think. I did a mystery grab bag, and this was in there, and I thought, for heaven's sake, how am I going to use that? When my younger daughter saw it, she was like, ooh, I love that. And it was shortly thereafter that older sister's graduation quilt was done and up and off and gone. And the plotting and scheming started. So this is the very first fabric. And then from there on, it was how many different kinds of black fabrics can we get to make this quilt interesting? So here it is. And I will tell you what I have learned. One of the things, I learn a lot with every quilt. One of the things I have learned about this quilt, or about fabric, I guess, is just like gray and brown, there are every variation of black fabrics out there. It's very hard to find true black, number one. Number two, there are a surprising number of brown blacks out there. There are a lot of gray blacks, and there are some surprising green blacks. So when we went on the prowl, and let me tell you, it was a prowl for interesting black fabric, we would buy them independently of having the stack that we had already collected. And I'm not much of a collector, with the exception of linen. And so this whole idea of all throughout the year gathering and collecting black fabrics, in my mind, it was, we're going to get all these little fat quarters of black fabric and get home, and it's just going to be a breeze. Turns out, not a breeze to match blacks together. I did have some shirts in this quilt, and my friend Jennifer donated mightily to the cause, but a lot of them, in fact, I think the bulk of them are actually not. And I guess that's the benefit of going with Mom to the fabric store. You get to get the fun stuff that you see. It also has been such an interesting exercise. So I guess number two thing that I learned is that just because the fabric is black, when you start putting lots of design on it, it changes the value. So you may notice just in looking across the landscape of this quilt that some of them appear very light and some are significantly more dark. And of course, makes total sense, especially if you've been a quilter for a long time. You know, the more white that there is on that black print, the lighter it's going to be from a distance. So these little bitty white polka dots, that there are a lot of them from a distance, that reads not as black as, for example, these ones that are black shirts with little blue flecks on them. Originally, we were going to incorporate some navy fabrics with it too. And we sat down to do the fabric pool, you know, all of the fabrics that we had gathered over however many months, every time we would go in the afternoon to the fabric store, realized almost immediately that it just wasn't going to fit the bill for what she wanted. And trying to figure out how to integrate black and very dark gray and navy together. And some of the navies had not exclusively white print on them. And it just really changed the whole tone. And then while we were in the kind of fabric deciding process, which was actually a very lengthy process, I decided that the way to do this was to make St. Louis 16 patch blocks. And then that way we could have, instead of having just a completely random mix of fabrics all throughout the whole quilt, there would be a section of each fabric that she liked. The thought there was that it would be a little easier to put together in the final quilt top. I'm not sure that it was actually. And of course, if you've been with me, you know that I don't do random anyway. So it was kind of a laughable concept even to begin with. Big Sister's quilt was blocks of half square triangles. And so we kind of kept that theme. You know, it's a 4x4, and each section has its fabrics next to another section with its fabrics. And I really think in the end that It may not have been easy to put together, but it was the right decision, because what happens, at least for me, is there's just that little mini celebration of each fabric all throughout. And as we started putting it together and started, collecting all those fabrics and kind of narrowing down, we really had to struggle over which fabrics we kept and which fabrics got the cut, literally. It was not as easy as we thought, because there are some black fabrics with colored print on them, like the Rifle Paper Company floral. There's this batik-looking one up here in the corner where my hand is that's got just a really interesting print, but it's multicolored. And then over here on this side is an industrial looking blueprint, and it is very black with very stark white lines on it. Those two extremes and everything in between. We have some Moda Grunge. We just really have a whole array. It's funny, when she originally, I started to say suggested, but told me really that she wanted a black and white quilt, I really should not have been surprised. This child, from just the earliest of ages, her favorite animal was a penguin. And her favorite game to play is Yahtzee. And we laugh about the family uniform, which actually I am wearing today, which is black shirt and either black jeans, blue jeans, or some other sort of dark jeans. I'm usually the only one that veers from the family uniform. So we love the black in our family, and we love the contrast. And I think there's something about that order and that contrast for her that she really just loved. And so then it was a matter, like I said, of finding all of the black fabrics, just exclusively black background fabrics that would go with the black and white quilt. So at whatever point we decided that we were really going to hold out for favorite black fabrics, we had to have a conversation about, this is not going to be done by the time you graduate high school. So I had to pose the question, do you want it done on time and have to compromise with some of the fabrics, or do you want to hold out for fabrics that you really love and get exactly what you want? And the answer was, she wanted to hold out and get the fabrics that she wanted. And I think in this way, this quilt has been very different than most, if not all, of the other quilts that I've made, because I don't really do commission quilts. I make the quilts that I want to make for people that I love and care for. And I have been given color palettes. So I have baby quilts, like What's the Nursery colors, that I have kind of worked around. But it's really been up to me to decide the pattern and the fabrics and the specific colors, and then how to put that together. And this quilt is far more like a commission quilt, because she had a very specific vision and very specific ideas and goals, and wanted to be involved in the process, which was wonderful and great. And really, I guess if you're going to have a commission quilt, even though there was no commission involved, it's like you either have to be all in or not in at all. If you just get a little bit of information, like purple quilt, what they're thinking is royal purple and what you're thinking is lavender, then there's disappointment and not a lot of feedback or input. In this situation, she was all in, which has been really, really great, but it has made it a more time-consuming process. But I think in the end, to shop together and plan together, we did the layout together, has been such a wonderful experience for me as a mom, obviously, because we would get together and go fabric shopping. And then once we got the fabrics settled on, then it was a matter of putting them together in the way that we both could be satisfied with as little a compromise as possible, although there were some. But not just as a mom, as a quilter. Say, okay, well, I know you want to do this, but that's not really possible given these fabrics. So do you want to hold out and find that fabric, or do you want to compromise here, knowing that this overall impact is going to be largely the same or whatever? I think it was a learning experience for both of us. And because, I say she's the colorist, but there's not a lot of color. It's more value, and there's a lot of nuance in it. And so we made it through. We made it through the fabric choosing, fabric purchasing, cutting, sewing. And I did do some strip sewing on this one because the blocks, this actual strips, are not very long, which I can do that and enjoy that. When it starts getting really long, I start getting kind of grouchy. Came together really well. In fact, it was a delightful quilt top to make. So for those of you who have not made a checkerboard quilt, I highly recommend it. And this is such a great way to do it. The 16 patches attached to each other. So you get the benefit of making a block. So you can do it block by block, which if you, like me, are someone who works outside of home and, I'm not a full-time quilter, I could make a block and enjoy that and then attach it to the next and still get that overall checkerboard feel. So really a fun experience. And then we literally hit the wall with it, because then we had to decide backing. And by this point, my younger daughter had gone to college. And so now we're doing this when she comes home and somewhat, via text or phone or whatever. And I just decided I'm not even going to try to look, because I would send her pictures of fabric, and then there was debate about whether it would work and what was the feel we were going for. And in the end, finally, one weekend she was home, and I was like, we just have to, we have to make a decision. So we sat on the couch together, probably looked at 100 fabrics. And in the end, we settled on Speckled by Rashida Coleman Hale for Ruby Star Society. And I want to show you that. Here is the back. I absolutely love it. I was not sure I was going to like it. This much black for a quilt that is a loving gift for someone. I don't know. It felt really dark to me. And here we are back to the making a specific quilt for a specific person in a specific time. This is what she loves. And I will say, I have yet to see one that I don't like. It is such an interesting combination of colors, and I would never in a million years have put these colors together. So it is a light blue speckle. There's a darker blue, almost cornflower speckle. There's a coppery metallic. It's like not quite copper, not quite gold. And then there's this just unusual, I'm going to call it brick. It's not maroon. It's not brown. I don't think there would ever be a time that I would put those 3 or 4 colors together, and definitely not on top of black. But the effect that it has is one of, to me, it looks like a universe. It looks like a night sky. Our daughter originally started off in aerospace engineering. She has decided that that is not the direction she wants to go, which is perfectly reasonable for an 18-year-old to decide, you know what, I don't think that's what I want to do. It just has that feel. It has the vibe. It has the universe vibe. And if there ever was a kid that needed a universe vibe, it's our youngest. It's just absolutely perfect for her. And when I got the quilt back from the long arm quilter, which we'll get to that, I had a moment where I was trying to decide what sort of binding to put on it. Did I want to just do black? We knew we didn't want to do white. I had a half a second where I considered a dark gray or something kind of like medium value between white and black, which is gray. And in the end, I actually bound it in the same fabric that's on the back. Because of that color variation, just that very subtle color variation, it just works with every single fabric in this quilt. If it gets up against one of the brownie blacks, it's got that brick to tie it in. If it gets up against one of the bluey blacks, it has the blue to tie it in. And the coppery gold goes with everything. So I feel like it was just the frame that it needed. So went with that. I actually have not put the label on it, so it's done, but it still needs a label, which is pretty often the case with me. The quilting was such an interesting discussion, and very much one of those things that's like knowing your client or knowing your recipient. We talked a lot about it, and there was a time that we both considered that it would be interesting to have something that kind of fell with the same pattern, quilting pattern, in every square. But as you may know, even though they're pretty close, they're not exact. And when we talked about it, my daughter's comment was, well, it needs to line up exactly with the squares, because if it doesn't, it's going to drive me crazy. And I was like, then we don't need to pick anything that's going to have to fit in every square, because quilting is an inexact art on an inexact art. And so I'm like, the quilting panto, if we use a panto, will be exact and the quilt beneath it will not be. She's like, okay, then no. Like, it's a no for me. And so then it was a matter of coming up with something that had an overall feel that she liked. Of course, I suggested something curvy because it is so blocky and so very high contrast. And so I felt like it needed something to kind of soften up. So we looked at every quilting pattern under the sun and ended up with Naruto clouds, which, if you're familiar with anime, that is an anime. It actually is an anime that my daughter has or does watch. It also, interestingly enough, is Japanese for whirlpool or maelstrom, because it's a place, the Naruto Strait in Japan, where two bodies of water come together and it creates this natural whirlpool. But it's a cloud-like version of that. And if you were to see it, like if you Google it or whatever, you'll totally get it. It's got that kind of spiral, swirly feel. But the overall motif is a cloud. And so something about that clouds and universe and sky and stars and black and white, it just kind of all came together. And I packed it up and sent it off to the long armor. And she texted me, "What would you like for your thread choice?" I don't know. I don't know. I have no idea. And she goes, "We could do light gray. We could do dark gray. We could do black." We kind of excluded black and white as too extreme because there's already a lot of extremists here. In the end, Vicki has a variegated gray thread that goes from very light gray to a very dark gray. And so she held it out in a picture on the text, and I was like, perfect, let's do it. And what that has done, and it makes me so very happy, it has given it another point of interest and dimension, because it is so high contrast, because there's, black and white, the two extremes on the value. It gives it some middle ground, and the middle ground is the middle ground, and it is some variability across the whole surface of the quilt and the back. And I love that. I think that was such a wise suggestion and such a good choice. And so even as I'm sitting here, I see, as it's like the way the darker variegated thread comes in, and then it kind of gets lighter, and then, which is of course the nature of variegated thread. It gave it the curves that it needed. It gave it that other point of interest, and it kind of softens the whites a little bit and blends the whites and blacks together and gives it something kind of grounding between all of this high contrast, but retains the purity of those lines. And I love that. I think that's such a great thing. And this is the beauty of working with someone who's experienced and who has a wide range of understanding about what can really enhance the look of a quilt. So there you have it. Graduation quilt number 2. Done and done, minus the label. It has been an interesting journey with this quilt because of the time that we took to choose carefully, probably more choosing and more time and more energy on getting just the right fabric than any other quilt that I've done before it. And so what that has made, at least for me, I hope it is true for my younger daughter, is that each fabric represents really a point in time with my daughter at a fabric store. I remember where we were when we chose this fabric, and this one online, and this one that we stumbled on at Hobby Lobby, and the skulls and the spider webs. And so each block represents a day where I spent time with my daughter in the fabric store. I don't know where this is coming from, Paul, just like all of a sudden. It just hit me like a ton of bricks, like literally every block. Whew. Sorry, a little verklempt there. When I realized that every one of these blocks represents time together that we had, and laughing in the car and making jokes in the fabric store and arguing about whether it's apricot or peach, and this one is too dark, this one is too light, but each block is a day that we spent together. And I hope that from now until the end of our time, that she looks at this and remembers that time we spent together making really a quilt together. And I hope it's exactly what she wanted. Thanks for coming along with me today as I have reminisced over the course of this quilt. I hope that it's given you some encouragement about your own projects and the meaning behind each and every quilt that we make. I'm Kathy Martin. This is the Catbird Quilts. Thanks so much for watching.